First item we have is bill introductions. Any bills to introduce? Seeing none. Move on to the approval of the minutes from March 9th and 15th. Recognize Senator Clays.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the adoption of the minutes.
Have a motion, second by Senator Fagg. Any questions, discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Committee, we're going to move to final action. A couple of our committee members may have to leave a little early, so I want to get that taken care of right off. Final action, we'll start with Senate Bill 295, authorizing the continuation of the 20 mil statewide property tax levy for schools.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 295 would authorize the continuation of the 20 mil statewide property tax levy for schools. This would extend it another 2 school years through school year 2024-2025.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, Senator Masterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd move we pass out 295 favorably.
Have a motion, second by Senator McGinn. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we'll move to Senate Bill 307, adding for-profit private entity to the definition of a qualified applicant in the Kansas Fights Addiction Act. David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Senate Bill 307, this would amend the definition section in the Kansas Fights Addiction Act to add for-profit private entities to the definition of qualified applicant so that those entities could then apply for grants from the Kansas Fights Addiction Fund.
Any questions? Seeing none, Senator Masterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move we pass out 307 favorably.
Have a motion, second by Senator Alley. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Move on to Senate Bill 308, establishing a state employment preference for persons with disabilities. David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 308, this would establish what is known as Kathy's Bill, relating to a hiring promotion preference in state employment for persons with disability, and then also amends statute regarding the veteran's preference to include remarried spouses of a deceased veteran and surviving spouses of a prisoner of war, regardless of the spouse's marital status.
Any questions? Senator McGinn. Oh, motion by Senator McGinn.
Thank you. I make a motion to move out Senate Bill 308 favorably for passage.
Okay, and we have a second by Senator Fagg. Any questions, Senator Petty?
I'm just going to voice one concern, and that's the change in this bill that would lower the, that has the spouse of the veteran who has, and it was 100% service-connected disability to 30% or greater disabilities. I just think that that's a dramatic change, and so it does cause me to have pause for this change in the bill.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we'll move on to Senate Bill 309, creating the Fixing Instance Revenue Shock for Taxpayers Fund and the Local Extraordinary Needs Fund, establishing the Joint Committee on Local Extraordinary Needs Grants, and abolishing the Local Ad Valorem Tax Reduction Fund. David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Senate Bill 309, this would create the Fixing Instant Revenue Shock for Taxpayer Fund, or the FIRST Fund. The fund would be administered by the state treasurer. The purpose of the fund would be to restore to cities and counties local retailer sales or compensating use tax revenue that would be lost due to the enactment of any legislation. There's a bill authorizes the transfer of $220 million from the state general fund to the FIRST Fund on July 1st, 2023. Whenever there's any legislation that reduces the city's or county's local sales tax revenue, the director of taxation would have to certify the amount of such revenue collected during the 12 months immediately preceding the effective date of the legislation, and actual revenue collections for the 12 months following the effective date of legislation. And then the city and county would also have to certify that they will comply with the revenue neutral rate statute and procedures prior to receiving any monies from the fund. And then Section 2 creates the Local Extraordinary Needs Fund, the fund that is also administered by the treasurer. Its purpose is to provide grants to cities and counties for capital expenditure projects. The bill authorizes a transfer of $50 million from the State General Fund to the Local Extraordinary Needs Fund, again on July 1st, 2023. And the bill also establishes the Joint Committee on Local Extraordinary Needs Grants. It's a 10-member committee, 5 from the House, 5 from the Senate. They would review all grant applications, and if they approve those applications, they would forward that to the state treasurer, and then the treasurer would pay out from the Local Extraordinary Needs Fund for those particular grants. The grants for a single project cannot exceed $2 million. Section 4 of the bill abolishes the local ad valorem tax reduction fund. And then there's a few other like technical adjustments in there relating to the removal of the local ad valorem tax reduction from statute.
Any questions? Senator Masterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have an amendment that I'd like David to hand out, and it's pretty easy to explain. I'll just explain it why he's handing it out, but you can see it in writing. Because the intention was to have any local jurisdiction that was directly affected by a change we make in sales tax exemption eligible here. So this would simply add Washburn, because it was written as cities, counties, would also add Washburn to that.
Questions on the amendment? Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do support this amendment. In general, I think it would be nice to add in other entities like local libraries and other things. I don't know if those are currently excluded or not, because there are entities out there, and I'm not an expert on this, so I won't pretend to be, but I know that. So for example, if a city commission designates a library as a taxing authority, it still needs to roll up to the city in terms of final approval for those kind of mill levy rates. So I was just going to ask the revisor if some of those local entities that are not necessarily municipalities, but maybe they're sub-entities that actually can add in a mill, have that authority, would they still be able to apply for the underlying, if there was a trace back through the elected official? For example, if there's a library that has taxing authority is really what I'm looking for.
David, can you answer that?
Mr. Chairman, I think it would have to be depending on that local, that taxing subdivision, if the money would have to flow through either the city or the county, as it is now, it wouldn't go like directly to a library board or anything of that nature. It'd have to be city or county, or in this case, Washburn, as they levy sales taxes. I don't know how many others actually levy sales tax. That's kind of beyond my thing. I think a lot of those are property tax levies, but I'm not aware. I just don't know.
Okay, thank you, Dick.
Other questions on the amendment? Senator Masterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would add, if we look into that a little deeper, if there are, because it is truly the intent, if any local entity that has a direct effect by a change we make in sales tax, that is the intention of the bill. So as we look into it a little further, that could be potentially a friendly amendment on the floor.
Any other questions on the amendment? Seeing none, Senator Masterson, if you'd like to make your motion.
I'd move my amendment.
We have a second by Senator Alley. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Any questions on Senate Bill 309? I might just mention a couple of things. This is being done just in case this legislation would go through that would actually take sales tax on food to zero. Because we've all read in the newspaper for the last 2 years that food sales tax was going to be axed to zero. When you go to zero, it affects local government's ability to collect sales tax that they are collecting on food. So that's why this is needed, in case any of you were wondering. And the intent of this is to hold cities and counties harmless. Other questions? Senator Petty.
Well, I know the intent of this is to hold cities and counties harmless supposedly, but for 1 year. And we heard testimony, and we know from our own information and from our knowledge that we as a state have not followed through. This is an example where this is taking out LAVTR, which has been a piece of legislation that we haven't funded now for years. And that was a partnership with the state and local governments. So our local governments have no reason to even want to try to trust us, because we have shown that we were not good partners to trust when it comes to that. And this, not only, it has funding in it for a year, but nothing more. That carrot of the 50 million to apply for grants up to 2 million. I mean, that's just what it is a carrot. The reality that now we're saying, hey, we're going to hold you harmless, but we also are going to put in other stipulations in place to hold you harmless, even though you already have been doing what you needed to do to bring in the revenues within your own cities and counties. I mean, we heard from, these are just a few, but we heard from Olathe that they would lose 8 million. The county of Sedgwick, 11 million. I mean, those are substantial dollars. That would be true for my own community as well. So I don't, you can say, hey, if this piece of if a piece of legislation goes ahead, we've got this in place to help to mitigate that fact. The conversation that started last year with the passing of the sales tax, the state's portion is always been talked about, the state's portion. It wasn't until this year, this legislative session, that the notion was set out there to remove the local sales tax. So I'm very much opposed to Senate Bill 309. I think it, if we really want to be true partners with our local units of government, we should let them have the local control that they have in place right now to make decisions for their communities. That's where it's best met.
Senator Pittman.
First, I have a quick question for the revisor. I just wanted to, when we say, I want to be very clear, when we say compliance with the revenue neutral tax rate, Mr. Chair, I want to make sure that it doesn't mean that they have to be revenue neutral. It's just they have to be in compliance with the reporting. Is that accurate in terms of the language?
David.
Mr. Chairman, yes, that would be they would just, if they wanted to go beyond the revenue neutral rate, they would have to follow the provisions in that statute, through the hearings and the notice and everything like that. But they wouldn't have, so as long as they comply with that statute to go beyond revenue neutral, they would be in compliance.
My second point I'll make is I actually do kind of like this bill. I like the way we are helping address the locals. However, getting rid of the LAVTR puts me at unease, because I personally feel like we should have been doing that for the last 20 years, like we had in the statute. And I don't like that we're getting rid of a constant funding source that could have paid for the locals portion of this quite easily on an ongoing basis. So I'm at a pause here on my approach on this, but I'm just kind of expressing that to the committee.
Other questions? Senator Maston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And more of a response, the statement that this is only 1 year, nothing more, is nothing short of incorrect. I've not seen a single scenario, if you maximize every effect, even on the maximum of the bills, that even came close to the amount of money that we're putting in this. So there is, at a minimum, more than a year, multiple years. Two, this also would cover things that are currently in the till. The governor has proposed an exemption for feminine products and diapers, all-out exemption. Locals go away. It would correct that. There are bills that are coming on our floor that deal with tax exemptions for infrastructure, for broadband. Also an exemption that would affect the locals, fixes that. There is not a single scenario in which this is not better for our locals.
Other questions or discussion? Seeing none, Senator Masterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we pass out 309 favorably as amended.
Have a motion, second by Senator Clays. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Chairman,
Senator?
I would like to be recorded as a pass because I wasn't here for the hearing, and I'm just uncomfortable with Sedgwick County being in there in opposition.
Thank you. Recorded as a no and recorded as a pass. Thank you. Okay, committee, we will now go to our hearing. We'll open the hearing on House Bill 2077, substitute for House Bill 2077 by the Committee on Appropriations, implementing additional reporting requirements for informational technology projects and state agencies requiring additional information technology security training and status reports, requiring reporting of significant cybersecurity audits, and changing the membership requirements, terms of the members, and the quorum requirements for the Information Technology Executive Council. We'll have an overview by Natalie Scott, Office of Revisor of Statute. Natalie, welcome committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I feel like you practically did my job there, reciting the short title, so appreciate that. For those of you I haven't worked with before, I'm Natalie. I primarily staff judiciary, but I also do the Joint Committee on Information Technology. So I'm going to walk you through this bill today. House Bill 2077, as the chairman mentioned, it implements a lot of IT changes. Section 1 was added by the House Committee on Appropriations. It enacts a new section of law that would provide that any entity that transmits, receives, processes, or stores personal information that is provided by the state of Kansas or supports information systems operated by the state of Kansas, or any governmental entity that accesses information systems operated by the state of Kansas that has a significant cybersecurity incident would be required to notify the Kansas Information Security Office within 12 hours of discovery of that incident. The House Committee of the Whole added an amendment to provide that entities that connect to the Kansas Criminal Justice Information System would report those incidents in compliance with rules and regulations adopted pursuant to KSA 74-5704. So they would be exempt from the reporting requirement in this new section. Section 2 amends KSA 46-2102. That would change the responsibilities for the Joint Committee on Information Technology. The bill would require the Joint Committee to advise and consult on all state agency information technology projects that pose a significant business risk as determined by policies set forth by the Information Technology Executive Council. Section 3 amends KSA 74-5704. That again was added by the House Committee of the Whole related to that KCJIS amendment. It would require the Kansas Criminal Justice Information System Committee to adopt those rules and regulations to require reporting of cybersecurity incidents not later than 12 hours after discovering that incident. Section 4 amends KSA 75-7201. Which would make changes to the definitions used throughout the information technology sections. Under current law there, an information technology project is defined as a project with an estimated cumulative cost of $250,000 or more, and it includes any project that has proposed expenditures for new or replacement equipment or software, upgrade improvements to existing equipment and any computer systems, programs, or software upgrades, or data consulting or other professional services for the project. This bill would change that definition to define a project as an information technology effort of defined and limited duration that implements, affects a change in, or presents a risk to process, services, security, systems, records, data, human resources, or architecture. It would also the definition of a project would, of a project change or overrun would change from an increase of $1 million or a 10% to a threshold established by ITEC policies. The bill also adds a new definition of business risk to be used throughout those sections. Section 5 amends KSA 75-7202. That's the statute that creates the Information Technology Executive Council. This provision was added by the House Committee on Appropriations. Originally, these provisions were found in House Bill 2078, if you want to look for the testimony on those. essentially, this bill would remove the requirement that the legislative members of that council come from certain committees, and it would allow the president, the speaker, and both minority leaders to appoint members from their membership as a whole. Vacancies would be filled in the same manner as the original appointment was, and the bill also provides that a quorum of the council would be 9 members, and all actions would be required to be taken by a majority of the members appointed to the council, not just a majority of the quorum. Sections 6, 7, and 8 make changes to the reporting requirements for the CETOs of each of the branches of government. It would change those reporting requirements to apply to all planned information technology projects that are reportable. Section 9 makes changes to the reporting requirements for agencies concerning IT projects. It would require an agency to submit a report for a project that includes documentation with a financial plan showing the proposed source of funding with cost estimates. Any information technology project that was determined to have a significant business risk under those new ITech policies would be presented to the Joint Committee on Information Technology by the CETO from the agency that the project's coming from. The bill would also require that prior to the release of any request for proposals, all the specifications for bids or proposals related to an approved IT project for one or more state agencies would have to be approved by the appropriate CETO for that agency. State agencies would not be able to approve the release of any request for a proposal or other bid event for a high-risk information technology project without first having advised and consulted with the Joint Committee on Information Technology. Section 10 amends KSA 75-7210. That concerns the submission of reports by the CETOs to the Joint Committee and to other legislative committees. The bill would remove that report or move that reporting date from October 1st to November 1st. It would also require the Joint Committee to review the estimates and make recommendations to the House Appropriations Committee and this committee. Section 11 amends KSA 75-7211, which is related to information technology changes and the Joint Committee. It would require agency heads to report project changes or overruns to JCIT through that agency's CETO pursuant to policies adopted by ITech. Sections 12 through 16 amend sections in the Kansas Cybersecurity Act to require information technology security training and cybersecurity status reports from state agencies. The bill would require that the CISO ensure a cybersecurity awareness training program is available to all state agencies. It would also require a full report to the Joint Committee on Information Technology instead of the summary that is required right now. That summary, though, would have to now be given to the House Committee on Appropriations and this committee. The CISO, with input from the Joint Committee on Information Technology and the Joint Committee on Security, would have to require a self-assessment report template, and that template would be provided for agencies for use. And then lastly, the head of all state agencies would be required to participate in annual agency leadership training, ensure that all information technology login credentials are disabled the same day that an employee ends their employment with the state. And it would also require that all employees with access to information technology receive a minimum of 1 hour of security training per year. And with that, I can take any questions.
Thank you, Natalie. Questions, Senator Alley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Does this apply to anything outside of our government agencies, such as colleges,
Natalie?
universities?
Mr. Chairman, there are some reporting requirements for higher ed projects. The Joint Committee on Information Technology does get updates on those projects. So depending on the project definition, some of those are reportable. They're reportable under current law, and they would continue to be reportable under the provisions of this bill.
Senator Alley?
What about cybersecurity at our colleges?
Natalie?
So are you talking about the new section 1 that requires this? Oh, I see. So that section that requires the reporting of the breaches within the 12 hours to the CISO, I believe that would apply to universities because it applies to any entity, whether it's public or private, that transmits, receives, or processes personal information that's provided by the state of Kansas. So they would fall under that, but I think they would also potentially fall under any governmental entity that accesses information systems operated by the state of Kansas. So, and Jeff, I think, is providing some testimony, so he can correct me if he thinks I'm wrong, but I think that that new provision would apply to the universities.
Senator Alley.
Excuse me, sir. Have the universities been contacted about that?
That I do not know.
Other questions, Senator Pittman?
Just quickly, obviously, there's quite a few bills in here that are concepts that have come together over the years. Can you just remind us where the origination of this bill came from?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Pittman, this bill has been worked on by the Joint Committee over the interim for the last few years. So originally, most of the contents of this bill were introduced last year. The provisions that were contained in House Bill 2078, that was a new concept that also originated from the Joint Committee, but you're seeing all of that here. But this bill came to you last year from the committee as well.
Senator Pittman.
No. Do you have the numbers of how it passed the House?
I did not bring that up here, but I can grab it, or David might have it right there.
I think it was 80-some votes. David?
Mr. Chairman, yes, the substitute for House Bill 2077 passed the House 123-0 on March 8th of this year.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Natalie. Proponents, is there anyone in the audience that is a proponent for this that would like to speak? Okay, seeing none. We have written only Mike Cardone with the Consumer Data Industry Association. Neutrals, we have Jeff Maxon, Interim Chief Information Technology Officer, Eric Stafford, Kansas Chamber, and written only. Sorry, the neutrals I had wrote down wrong. It would be oral would be Jeff Maxim, Interim Chief Information Technology Officer. Jeff, welcome committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Jeff Maxon. I'm the Interim Chief Information Technology Officer for Executive Branch, and I'm also the Chief Information Security Officer for Executive Branch as well right now. I'm here to testify regarding House Bill 2077. Again, this is a culmination of several years of working between my office, JCIT, the Joint Committee on Information Technology, and various stakeholders to kind of look at how we report IT technology projects in the state. In the past, it had been a $250,000 threshold. As we're seeing, its technology is becoming more and more important to business units. We're seeing costs of information technology rise, so that $250,000 threshold for projects became problematic for some agencies as a lot of efforts became well over that, which could have been a simple, we're replacing a license, which is basically just a transaction that would cost over $250,000 now to turn into a long list of reporting requirements based on that. So things like that wanted us to really look at how we reevaluate projects and what that really means to a business, as we see maybe some of these non-cabinet agencies that might not have a $250,000 project, but it is very critical to their business processes go through. We want to measure that based on a risk to the individual agency. So that's kind of where this new reporting requirement is coming from and changing what the definition of an IT project is to make sure we're looking at things through the lens of how it affects business operations. And so this bill hopefully does that. It'll rechange how we report as CTOs to JCIT and what that means for also the agencies as they report and how they're reporting that. So this is something that will hopefully give better view and visibility to the things that are happening within IT projects to the legislators. So from that is a significant change, but something that we do see some value in moving forward. And additionally, This bill will also kind of use a model that is similar to the Joint Committee on State Building Construction. So JCIT will have the opportunity to kind of review projects and provide input and feedback into those associated projects to the responsible agencies to get concerns from legislators kind of in that process. So it's not something after the fact where we're down the road and then legislators start having questions. We're hoping to get out in front of that and be transparent with what we're doing and supporting you and your mission to support our constituents. So this bill will give those efforts as well. And some of the other pieces that I want to highlight under the KCA, going back to your question, Senator Alley, with those recommendations, no, we did not directly engage with the Regents institutions for reporting, but I'll explain why here in a second. So when we're looking at this from a reporting structure, cyber attacks are moving faster and faster, and we have a lot of points where we're integrating with vendors and other agencies and different local or different levels of government where we're directly connected with things. And if a cyber attack happens and we're not aware, they have the ability to move between entities. And so the intent of some of this language was to capture that, how that is impacting cities, counties, states, and our relationships as third party. What we call third party risk is something that is becoming a top priority for organizations and how we can manage that. And so the intent is to be made aware of incidents so we can take appropriate defensive actions to protect state networks, state systems, and state data. And so since universities are technically already tied as executive branch agencies to the extent we're already collaborating with them to that nature. So we did not go out and specifically solicit for this specific language. But going back to the reporting requirements, we looked at different timeframes. The federal government has created some reporting requirements through their critical infrastructure and cybersecurity agency, CISA, for 72 hours for reporting from critical infrastructure. That reporting is for more information gathering and reporting. Our intention with this bill is for incident response, so we're notified of incidents that may impact state systems and state data so we can take the appropriate defensive actions to protect ourselves and protect that data. And so it is more of an awareness so we can take appropriate defensive actions as well. So again, the intent is folks that have access to state data through a contractual means or as a subcontractor or through requirements, but with local government stuff, that if they have something that has a potential to impact our data and citizens' data or our information systems, they're letting us know so we can defend ourselves accordingly and properly. So also, in addition, kind of where we're coming with timeframes, in many cases, our requirements to report to the federal government when we utilize their data to help provide services and stuff, our requirement to the federal government is actually an hour time. So if we have suspected cybersecurity incident, we have approximately an hour to notify the federal government. We have some sort of incident that may be impacting them. That requirement also applies down to entities that are federal contractors. So a lot of these businesses that are doing business with us also do business with the federal government and have very similar requirements as we do with the federal government as well. So again, we're trying to solicit feedback as we work through this. This is evolving, but this is something we see as an effort to better protect the citizens and state government systems so we can continue to provide citizen services to the best of our ability. And with that, I'll stand for questions, sir.
Questions? Senator Pittman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll say a couple comments. Being on the Joint Committee on Information Technology, we saw members wanting to have more information. Those meetings had been about project updates and these types of things. And we looked at the Joint Building Committee. We realized how effective it was when it came to these major investments. And there are some very expensive investments in technology, and it's going to continue on that path as we go into the foreseeable future. And this seemed to be a really good mechanism of looking at the risk, looking at the dollar amounts, and putting some legislative oversight, but not be obstructive, but rather be proactive in terms of understanding where that money is going, how it's being managed, and to raise awareness about some of these projects. So the core of the bill, I strongly support. I think the CETO here has done a great job of advocating for it. There's other provisions in here I know that I've been contacted on around the cybersecurity pieces. We all know that cybersecurity is a huge priority. We've expressed it in this committee. I think this has taken us down a nice step. There were some, I think there's an important distinction that you've pulled out, which is there's response time and then there's reporting. And reporting could be 72 hours, it could be 2 weeks, you know.
Yes, sir.
I'm very indifferent about the reporting aspect, but the incident response is something that when we take our security audits, we have processes and things that are put in place. Those security audits measure those things, and we know how we rate on our agencies on some of those things, good and bad. This is just another step, in my opinion. I hope it's not onerous to those entities. I hope it's a partnership,
Understood.
not just I'm going to cut you off kind of thing. So I would just open up the question: how do you approach it with the local entities when when you want to have a proactive incident response? How can they perceive that from the state?
Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that question, Senator. So yeah, I mean, really, we're wanting to be open and transparent with all of our, we're wanting to work with our local governments as much as possible. And also part of that, it's not just reporting or having something. If we know about it, we can offer assistance as well. There's some things the state can bring to bear to help them through the incident, find ways to provide additional resources to them so they can continue to operate. Because some of these incidents can actually, bring their entire network down, as we saw with, for example, Wyandotte County. So how can we as a state provide assistance? If we don't know about it, we can't provide assistance and we can't defend it. So we're continuing to try and work with them and what that looks like through various different stakeholders, because even at the state level, we have stakeholders such as myself, Department of Revenue, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, where a lot of these integration points take place, and we're all wanting to make sure that whatever the outcome is, we can make sure there is no disruption to services to citizens. So again, that is taken a little case-by-case basis depending on what the incident is. But again, if we don't know about it, we can't do anything to help either ourselves or them in that instance.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, sir.
We also have Eric Stafford with the Kansas Chamber. Eric, welcome committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Good morning. I'm Eric Stafford with the Kansas Chamber, and we are neutral on House Bill 2077. You have a bill that passes the House 123 to 0, and then all of a sudden we get a phone call that says, hey, we got issues with this bill. And it's like, well, what bill? Like, well, we're not tracking that one. So we do apologize for the late input here and do appreciate our members who flagged this for us. Our concern, and also too, I want to say from the beginning, appreciate Jeff and Allie and their willingness to work with us and try to hammer out language over concerns that our members have expressed, largely just over Section 1, new Section 1 in the bill. Most of the concern deals with the 12 hours reporting time frame after discovery of a significant cybersecurity incident. We've received a variety of feedback, as you'll see in our written testimony. Some have said, we fall under the new federal cybersecurity incident reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act that passed Congress. And they've been looking for either an exemption there or an increase in time frame. But just overall have concerns over what the impact would be if it impacts their reporting. Some other feedback we've gotten that what if they have a third party that has been breached that also breaches their company, and then they don't know about it within 12 hours and have to report to the state within that time frame. So overall, just have some concerns over that provision. As you'll see in our written testimony, we're continuing to work with OITS to try to find language. I just sent an email out before this committee meeting started today for a 1:30 Zoom call tomorrow for any of our members who want to sit on a call with Allie and Jeff to try to work through that section. We do not want to hang the bill up. We know a lot of work has been put into that before, but that one section is what's causing concerns. So depending on the desires of the committee and time frame and all that, if we can get more time to work through Section 1, either delete it and move the bill forward, and then we can work that out and come up with language over the next 2 weeks before conference committees meet. Whatever the best approach is, we do want to continue to try to work to find a solution, but we also are sensitive to the work that has been done on this bill in the past, and we're not here to try to cause heartburn for anybody, but our members are expressing concerns over the time constraints in the bill and compliance and federal law, because some have said that, if we have a breach, and the FBI is coming in, we are not to disclose anything. And so we understand Jeff's concern that They just want to know something happened so they can turn off a switch. They don't need to know details. And the conversations we've had in the hallways here over the last 48 hours, understanding where they're coming from. So I think we can get there. I think our members are understanding where they're coming from, but we're just not there yet. And I'm in the process of working through, Jeff has sent us some alternative language to consider. So I'm sending that out to get feedback and getting feedback back, and then the hearings here. So we're just trying to manage end of session time constraints and issues that arise in the bill. But we do apologize for missing this at the beginning. It was, you read the subject of the bill and you think, oh, this is a Joint Committee on Information Technology bill. Everything's good. It's dealing with state agencies. Oh, wait, no, there's a provision in here that does impact private employers. So that is the summary of our concerns that have been expressed. But again, we do appreciate the fact that their representatives have been more than willing to accommodate concerns expressed by our members. And we're going to try to get a call tomorrow to discuss. But be happy to answer any questions that the committee might have.
Questions? Seeing none, thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, we also have written only with Robert Jacobs, Kansas Bureau of Investigation. Any other neutral or opponents or proponents that we missed? Seeing none, we'll close our hearing on House substitute for House Bill 2077. Committee, next we'll move on to a hearing. We'll open a hearing on Senate Bill 275, changing the total amount of credited to the state gaming revenue funding, increasing the transfer of monies from such fund to the Correctional Institutional Building Fund, and decreasing the transfer of monies to the State Economic Development Initiatives Fund. We'll start out with a overview with David Weiss, Office of Reviser of Statutes. David, welcome back, committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, Senate Bill 275 would increase the total amount of monies credited to the State Gaming Revenues Fund in each fiscal year. Currently, under current law, it's $50 million. This bill would increase that credited amount to $60 million each year. All amounts in excess of the $60 million threshold are transferred to the State General Fund. That's what currently happens with the 50 million. Anything above 50 million is SGF, and now this would be anything above the 60 million would go to SGF. Senate Bill 275 also increases the amount transferred from the State Gaming Revenues Fund to the Correctional Institutions Building Fund. Under current law, that percentage is at 10%. Under 275, the bill is the percentage is increased to 20% of the balance of the fund. And then this bill also then decreases from 85% to 75% the amount of State Gaming Revenues Fund monies that are transferred to the State Economic Development Initiatives Fund. The bill also eliminates some outdated provisions that referenced prior fiscal years and makes other technical amendments. The bill becomes effective upon publication of the statute book. And I think legislative research is passing out some information on really what these percentages mean in terms of dollars. And so I'll let you, but I can stay for any questions on the language of the bill.
Any questions on the language? Senator Masterson.
Maybe it's not on the language, maybe it is research on dollar amounts, but what all, statutorily, what all feeds the gaming revenue fund? Is it just the 4 state-owned casinos, or are there any other additional revenues that feed that?
I might let research, it's the traditional lottery sales. It's not the casinos that's in the, that's the expanded, this would be your traditional lottery amounts. But I think research can probably speak to any other things that come in, but yeah, it's not the
Lottery,
casino.
I thought lottery, sorry, Mr. Chairman, I thought lottery fed our EDIF. It doesn't feed it directly, is that?
There is the lottery funds do go to the EDIF. That's part of that. Right now, 85% is transferred to EDIF. Under current law, and this would be reduced to the 75% would go to EDIF. And then that extra 10% would actually go to the Correctional Institutions Building Fund. So that's where the 10% is going under the bill.
Senator Masterson.
Mr. Chair, 'cause it's been a minute since I've been in your seat, so ELARF then is what's fed by the casinos, right? And then so you have, I didn't realize there was another state gaming fund. So what, this might be research as well, what were the total receipts in that gaming fund? How much went to SGF is I guess what I'm asking in excess?
Yeah, I think I'd defer that to.
We are going to have Shirley give us some additional information too. She might answer them questions if that's,
Yeah, I think.
All this does,
I
Mr.
yield to
Chairman,
them on that.
is adjust percentages as it deals with that.
Yeah, the bill is just changing the percentages, and then I think Shirley will talk about what that means in terms of dollars. Yep.
Thank you.
other questions for David? Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Problem Gambling and Addiction Grant Fund, $100,000 under current law. I thought we had a larger percentage than that went to problem gambling.
David?
Well, from this particular fund, yeah, it's 100,000. It was 80,000, and then last year, as part of the sports gaming bill, that was increased to 100,000, and that's the first 100,000 from that gets credit of the fund has to go to problem gambling fund, but at least from the state gaming revenues fund side, that's where it is. But I mean, again, I might let research speak to other sources for the problem gambling fund. But
Thank you.
Other questions for David? Seeing none, thank you, David. Next, we'll have Shirley Morrow, the KLRD. Shirley has can answer a couple of those other questions.
Mr. Chair, if there's any questions actually on the EDIF, I will defer to Dylan on that, if that's okay.
Okay, you had some remarks, right, Shirley?
Yes. You have in front of you a pink sheet and a green sheet. The pink sheet actually will show you what the changes in the bill would do. Again, as David stated, it is currently 50 million. It's split 4 ways. The 100,000 for problem gambling is the first amount that comes out of the 50 million. Then there's an 85% of the remainder of that goes to the EDIF. You'll notice on the green sheet at the very bottom, which is the revenue sources, it will show the gaming revenues of 42,415,000. And then 10% is transferred to the Correctional Institutions Building Fund and 5% to the Juvenile Alternatives to Detention Fund. I was asked after Joint Building Committee did a field trip to Hutchinson and Winfield, and the Correctional Institutions Building Fund was discussed. And I was asked to look at this and maybe tweak some percentages and some amounts to see if we could increase the Correctional Institutions Building Fund. I looked at a lot of different scenarios. So on the pink sheet, you will notice where we're at now with current law, the 50 million, you take out the 100,000, you've got the 49.9. Of that, you take out the 85%, which gets you to the 42,415, which is on the green sheet. From that, you take out 10%, which is the 4,990,000, which is, and leaves you with the 5% that goes to the Juvenile Alternatives to Detention. The scenario of adding $10 million, raising the 50 million to 60 million, taking out the 100,000 gives you 44,925 for EDIF, so that would increase by 2.5 million. And then increasing from 10% to 20% for the correctional institutions would give that fund 11.9 million, and then the 5% would increase by 500,000. So all 4 of those, well, except for the 100,000, the 3 percentages, even though you change from 85 to 75% for EDIF, it still is an increase because we've added the 10 million. There's some additional information at the bottom there. The remaining balance, there's 1.2 million that goes to veterans programs. There's up to 8 million that go to mental health programs. And then the remaining fund is deposited into the state general fund. I have the last 12 years of what has been deposited of the remaining into the SGF, and the average over the last 12 years has been 22.3 million. So if you take the 10 million off the top, then what this would do would be effectively reducing that 22.5 percentage down to 12.5.
Questions? Senator Masterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I can pull some of this other later, but I think what I'm understanding, so the net effect is we're going to divert about 10 million that was going into SGIF to double what's going to corrections, the correctional institutions, and add a little more to EDIF and the juvenile detention. That's the net effect of the bill is we're scraping 10 million out of SGF and
Correct,
adding it over here through a special revenue fund. I understand what we're doing now. Thank you.
Other, Senator Pittman.
Say, you said 22 and 12, and you said percentage, but I think you meant million, right? Absolute funds.
On the 22.3 million, yes.
Yeah,
It would go down to 12.3 million.
Yep, got it.
Other questions for Shirley? Seeing none, thank you, Shirley. Next, we will have proponent, Senator Fagg.
There we go. I'm going to call this Shirley's bill. We've heard Kathy's bill this morning, now we're hearing Shirley's bill. So I appreciate her thought in what she's putting into this. A couple things that I would like to add to this is to make sure that we understand the real need out there, because there was a report that had come out that showed that we was like $338 million in repairs needed in our correctional system, and 164 million, that was immediate needs. So trying to address that, we're looking for solutions to that kind of thing. The other thing, I had Senator Cluse has been after me because he took a tour last summer of the Topeka Correctional Facility saying we need to get some things done. So that has been on my mind too. So I appreciate that. This is looking for possible solutions to address the problem. If we got into working the bill, you know, our percentages could be different. You know, how much do we need in economic development? If we didn't want to do the 10 million SGF, I could see all possibilities of that. But I thought this might be a bottom line. This could be one of our tools that we could look at to maybe start working on this problem.
Thank you. Questions for Senator Fagg? Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the Senator for coming up with an alternate solution for this. I really appreciate the correctional investment, the veterans piece of this, mental health. Some of these things are really great. I will say, though, philosophically, our committee is supposed to address each of these issues with our appropriation of that money. And we did go through that process in the subcommittee and the committee, but we know that a lot of those measures got cut out of the current position. This seems like a way to protect those things from any future kind of cuts and guarantee those investments. But I will say, you know, my thought, as I said on the floor, is that we do good work here, and we appropriate money, and we make decisions like that as a body, and consciously advocate for addressing each of these needs year over year. It seems to me that process should be followed, and this is a way to get around that a little bit to guarantee it gets in there. But I do appreciate the idea that maybe there's something here to guarantee that fund.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your thoughts, Senator Pittman, on that. You know, even if we have this hearing, it can give us something to be thinking forward on this too. So this will be here, and just knowing that that tool's out there and that somehow we need to be working that. So,
other questions for Senator Fagg? Seeing none, thank you, Senator. Opponents, are there any opponents to this bill? Seeing none, were there any neutrals? Okay, written only on the neutrals. We have Secretary Zumba, Department of Corrections. So committee, that should be in your packet. Anyone else that was wanting to speak to this bill? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 275. Committee, earlier, we passed out Senate Bill 307 And I would like to recognize Senator Clays.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I make a motion regarding Senate Bill 307. We did have a amendment that was requested by one of the conferees, so I would move reconsideration of the previous action on Senate Bill 307.
I have a motion, a second by Senator Fagg. Any discussion on the reconsider? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We'll open the hearing back up on Senate Bill 307. Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was my fault. We was running pretty quick right through that period of time, and I missed it, so I apologize.
No problem.
So I have a copy, if they'll present that. I will be talking as they pass this out. This is a very simple amendment. When you look at the Kansas Fight Addictions Grant Review Board members, this is to help them pay for subsistence allowance for mileage and other expenditures. So they're not paying them, but it's helping them cover their expenses coming to and from. So we appreciate people serving on that board, and the least we can do is cover their expenses.
Questions on the amendment? Senator McGinn.
I guess I got to get caught up and find out who's on the board. We have a lot of boards right here. Thank you. We have a lot of different boards that we don't pay people. I mean, it's kind of an honor to be on it. Are we going to start paying everybody that's on a board now? Just wondering where that all came from.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I cannot answer that question other than in this particular instance, I can see where we need to be doing that with the job they'll be doing with this.
Senator McGinn.
I think this is like something that probably should have had more discussion than this. I'm looking at someone appointed by the President of the Senate. That could be a legislator, which would get paid, and same with the Speaker. League of Municipalities, they're going to be paid by their organization. Kansas Associated Counties will be paid by their organization. Mental health boards be paid by their association. I really need to understand why we just all of a sudden picked this. Is there somebody in particular you want to make sure gets reimbursed? I'm just trying to understand. We've just not done this before.
Senator Fagg.
Mr. Chairman, I do not have the answer to that. That was brought to me. It made common sense. And I just felt like that was probably the right thing to do with the kind of work they was doing with this program.
Senator McGinn.
Well, based on precedents and how many boards we have on our books that those individuals do not get reimbursed, I'm not going to be supporting this.
Any other questions? Senator Clays.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was requested in the testimony of the chairman, who is Pat George. So if you go back to your 307 testimony, I think you'll see a brief there. But then also, if you look at the testimony from Stuart Little, it says the act including the amendment in 307. Oh, I'm thinking maybe he's just talking about the actual bill. Anyway, that came from the chairman, Pat George. That was the request, was to allow for that. It doesn't look like he explains the why outside of the travel to and from the meetings.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. George had called me, and the discussion was, as you ask people to serve on these boards, and they realize they got to pay their own way to come here, that he felt like that could be encumbrance to getting good, effective people to come. So that's why he was pursuing this.
Senator McGinn.
Thank you. And Mr. George also served in the legislature, and he was well aware of how we pay people that get it appointed and get to serve. I was curious, he's kind of under, is he under the Attorney General at all? Because he popped in my office and he said something about, maybe he's on the Attorney General's opioid. So I was just curious if he was under Attorney General, and Attorney General could take care of it, but. That's all I had, thank you.
Other questions on the amendment? Seeing none, Senator Fagan.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the amendment to Senate Bill.
Have a motion, do we have a second? Second by Senator Pittman. Discussion? Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just got thinking about Senator McGinn's question. If under this, someone is paid by their organization, whether it be state organization, city or county, are we saying with this bill they they wouldn't pay him, would be under this bill. They would continue, shouldn't they continue to be paid by their own organization? If
David, can you tell us how this would affect someone that's currently, working for the county or so forth, city?
Mr. Chairman, the members under the amendment, so they would be paid, they would not receive compensation, so they wouldn't receive the $35 a day under 75, 3223, but they would be paid subsistence allowances, mileage, and other expenses as provided under that statute. And if they would be reimbursed if they do work for an agency or some other entity, that entity would be responsible for the payment of those expenses.
Senator Alley.
So if I heard that right, they would be paid under this proposal, under this amendment, they would be paid, would they also be paid by their home organization?
David?
They would be paid under this provision, and by the organization, the organization would be responsible to pay these expenses.
Senator Alley.
I'm not sure I understand everything I need to know about this one. But I do think that I don't mind paying someone that has to travel up here for that, but I don't want to be paid twice. And yet, to say the other thing that I have a concern about is if it is a county, for instance, that county they put them on the board, they should be responsible for their person coming up here, not the state. It's why I'm reading this.
Is that correct, David, you think?
Mr. Chairman, could you repeat the question? I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
Senator Alley.
Okay, if we have, we're going to use a county as an example. A county puts a person on the board, and we also have a legislature that's on the board. The state would pay the legislature's pay, the county would pay the travel expenses for their county employee. Under this provision, it is now, would it be the state's responsibility to pay for all of them?
David?
Looking at the underlying statute, just. Mr. Chairman, yeah, for like the members of the legislature or a state agency, it would be the state would be responsible to pay the expenses. And then for the counties or any, non-state entity, they would still have to pay they would have to pay those expenses. And if they have some other, compensation through their job position there, that would be separate from this. They would be, these expenses would be an additional amount that would be responsible by that entity.
Senator Alley? Okay. Senator McGinn?
So I think we're going down a slippery slope. I'd hate to waste legislative research's time, but I bet they could find hundreds of boards where people do not get paid, and it's an honor to serve, and we're going to change policy for one person. So,
Senator Fagg?
Mr. Chairman, could I just withdraw my motion?
Yes. Okay. You're second too, okay. So if that's the case, then we just need a motion to pass it back out. Senator Fagg?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we move Senate Bill 307 positively.
Motion, second by Senator Alley. Any discussion? Senator Petty?
Well, I think this discussion does bring home the issue that whether it's this board or other boards, we are asking, or those organizations are asking people to serve. And just as this one, it specifies there has to be people on this board residing in each state congressional district. So we are representative of the state. So I think it does beg the issue that it might be worth a post audit to look at how people are being compensated on those important board that we're asking to serve on. I'll just use an example. I have my daughter serving on the Board of Nursing, and they get mileage. That's it. So there's no compensation at all. So I think we do ask a lot of some people to provide expertise on these boards. It's very important, and it takes a lot of, this would be an example. I don't know the amount of time, but I would think that this board is going to take quite a bit of time when you're talking about the charge that they have. So I think it's worth looking more in depth and not just one board at a time.
Senator McGinn?
thank you. As a legislator, if we're not under the dome, we're working every day for free. But anyway, that's beside the point, and I guess they're evaluating that. But I think it'd be a great topic for Legislative Budget Committee when you have your meetings this summer and fall.
We'll put that on the list.
Mr. Chairman.
David?
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Chairman. I believe I misunderstood the previous question. I mean, if the members of this board would be paid the subsistence, mileage, and expenses when they travel to this board, and that would be paid out of, would be the Attorney General's office. So it would not be, they would have their county or whatever salary that's separate, but when they are serving on the board here and getting these allowances, this would be through the state, through the Attorney General. So I apologize. I think I misspoke earlier.
We have a motion and a second. So, what's the?
We have a motion in a second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we want to vote on that or? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Bill, Senator McGinn.
If this goes to the floor, that after we learn more about it, we could make an amendment on the floor. Okay.
Good idea. Any other business? Committee, that concludes our work for today. We are adjourned. Thank you.